The first time my goats got onto that golf course, I honestly thought maybe we could still fix things like neighbors. I really did. I figured some rich guy in loafers would yell a little, maybe threaten me with a lawyer, and then eventually somebody with common sense would step in and say, "All right, enough already. Put the fence back where it belongs and move on." What I didn't realize back then was that people who spend $40,000 on country club memberships don't think like regular folks anymore. Somewhere along the line, they stopped seeing land as something real. To them, it's numbers on paper, expansion opportunities, investment potential. But to me, that hillside was my grandfather's fingerprints in the dirt. It was my dad teaching me how to mend fence wire with frozen hands in January. It was every bad season we survived and every good season we earned. My name's Eli Mercer, and my family has raised goats outside Blackthorn Ridge, Tennessee since before interstate highways cut this country in half. We never got rich doing it, but we stayed afloat. 36 acres of rocky hillside, cedar trees, stubborn earth, and enough grazing land to keep a herd healthy if you rotated it right. Most people look at goats and laugh, but those animals paid my bills for 15 years. Cheese contracts, breeding stock, brush clearing jobs. Goats can make you a living if you understand them. And I understood them better than I understood most people. The trouble started the same year Bellcrest National opened down in the valley below my property. Whole thing looked like a movie set. Artificial lakes, imported grass, waterfalls flowing beside cart paths like God himself landscaped the place. They flattened half the valley building it. Folks around town acted like celebrities had moved in. Property values shot up overnight. Realtors started wearing cowboy boots they'd clearly never walked through mud in before. At first, I stayed out of it. Hell, I even thought it might help the town. The golfers stayed down below, my goats stayed up on the ridge, and life kept moving. Some mornings I'd hear applause drifting up from tournaments while I hauled feed buckets. Weird contrast, but peaceful enough. Then came the boundary clarification. That's what they called it. I came out one morning after a thunderstorm and noticed one of my fence posts leaning crooked. Not broken, moved. About 8 feet inward. At first I figured maybe runoff loosened it, but then I walked the line farther and noticed fresh concrete around 3 more posts. Somebody had dug them up and reset them. I remember standing there in muddy boots staring at my own pasture like I was losing my mind. Because when somebody steals land, they don't back a truck up and load it overnight. They nibble at it. Quietly. Slowly enough that you question yourself before you question them. I pulled the old survey maps out that night. My granddad kept every document in metal filing cabinets that smelled like dust and cigarettes. Handwritten notes, original county stamps, even old photographs from the 70s showing the fence line clear as day. And sure enough, they'd moved it. Not by inches either. In some spots, nearly 12 feet. Now 12 feet may not sound like much to people living in suburbs, but stretched across that property line, they'd taken close to an acre of usable pasture. Good grazing land too, the kind that mattered during dry summers. So the next morning I drove down to Bellcrest National. Place looked ridiculous. Marble floors inside the clubhouse, giant bronze horse statue out front, valet parking for golf. I found their operations manager in a glass office overlooking the 18th hole. His name was Gavin Pierce. Mid-40s maybe, silver watch, perfect teeth, one of those men who smiles before saying something insulting. He stood up shaking my hand like he was running for office. "Mr. Mercer, what can we do for you today?" I laid the survey maps across his desk. "You can start by explaining why your people moved my fence." He barely glanced at the papers. "Well, property boundaries can become complicated during expansion projects." "No," I said. "They become theft when somebody moves them without asking." That smile tightened just a little. I could tell he wasn't used to being spoken to directly. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together like a lawyer in a TV commercial. "Eli, Bellcrest has invested nearly $12 million into improving this community. These adjustments were made based on updated engineering assessments." "Engineering assessments," I repeated. "That your sprinklers needed my land." He chuckled at that. Actually chuckled. That's the moment things turned personal. Not when they stole the land, when he laughed about it. "Look," he said, "if there's a discrepancy, maybe we can arrange compensation." I stared at him for a second because I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. Compensation. Like he was offering to tip me after stealing my wallet. "That land isn't for rent," I told him. "Put the fence back." He sighed, stood up, and walked toward the window overlooking the course. You know, Mr. Mercer, progress is difficult for some people. I understand that. There it was. That little jab. The assumption that because I worked a farm and smelled like hay, I was some backward idiot standing in the way of civilization. I remember feeling my jaw tighten, so hard it hurt. My grandfather is buried 50 yards from that fence line, I said quietly. So don't talk to me about progress like I'm too stupid to understand it. For the first time, his smile disappeared completely. And when I left that office, I noticed something I hadn't before. 3 maintenance workers were already installing irrigation piping on the strip of land they'd stolen. That's when I realized they were never planning to give it back. And unfortunately for Belcrest National, my goats were already starting to notice the new grass on the other side of the fence. Now, if you've never owned goats before, let me explain something real quick. Goats are not livestock in the normal sense. Cows respect fences. Horses usually respect fences. Goats look at a fence the same way a criminal looks at a security camera, just another problem to outsmart. And once they decide something on the other side looks interesting, they become furry little demolition experts with hooves. Belcrest had spent millions making that course look like heaven. Perfect emerald fairways, soft watered grass, decorative shrubs imported from somewhere in Europe probably. Meanwhile, my side of the hill was going through one of the driest Julys we'd had in years. Every morning my goats stood near those damaged fence sections staring downhill like prisoners plotting escape routes. Especially one goat, named Lorraine. Now Lorraine was evil in a very specific way. Smart enough to understand consequences, mean enough not to care. She once figured out how to unlatch a feed shed and led 12 other goats inside like she was organizing a prison break. Another time she climbed onto the hood of my truck during Sunday service because somebody left a bag of hamburger buns in the cab. That goat feared nothing. So when Belcrest crews left sections of fencing weak and unfinished near the 7th fairway, I knew eventually something bad was coming. I just didn't know how bad. The first escape happened during the Ridge County Invitational, which apparently was a very big deal if you listen to local radio. Sponsors, politicians, businessmen from Nashville, the whole circus. I was repairing a water trough that morning when my nephew Caleb came flying down the hill on his four-wheeler yelling before he even stopped. "Uncle Eli," he shouted, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "The goats are golfing." I dropped my wrench immediately. And sure enough, halfway down the ridge, I could already hear screaming. Not terrified screaming, rich people screaming, which somehow sounds more offended than afraid. By the time I reached the fence line, 12 of my goats had spread across the 7th fairway like they paid membership dues. Lorraine stood dead center chewing expensive Kentucky bluegrass, while 3 golfers in bright polos waved clubs around helplessly. One guy yelled, "Do something." I remember yelling back, "Buddy, I'm trying." But honestly, I was trying not to laugh, because the scene looked absurd. A $70,000 golf cart sat abandoned while one of my younger goats climbed onto the seat chewing the scorecard. Another had wandered onto the putting green and left little brown presents near the hole while 2 groundskeepers argued about whether they could chase them without liability issues. Then I spotted Gavin marching toward me from across the fairway. That man looked like his blood pressure was about to kill him. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. "My goats," I said. "I can see that." Well, then we're both caught up. That didn't help. His face turned the color of boiled lobster. These animals damaged private property. I pointed toward the broken fence section his workers had left unsecured. "Looks to me like they entered through your property. That fence is your responsibility." "No," I said calmly. "The original fence was my responsibility. Your construction crew tore half of it apart." For a second I thought he might actually swing at me. Instead, he jabbed a finger toward the course. "You're paying for every dollar of damage." Now here's the thing. If Gavin had just fixed the fence after that first incident, none of what came later would have happened. Seriously, we could have still ended the whole thing right there. But rich, arrogant people have a strange condition where admitting fault physically hurts them. So instead of repairing the damaged sections properly, Belcrest doubled down. Over the next 2 weeks, they installed even more landscaping on my land. Decorative stone borders, new irrigation lines, fancy little pine trees worth more than my monthly truck payment. Every time I drove past, it felt less like a property dispute and more like somebody slowly bulldozing my family history while smiling to my face. And the town started taking sides too. That part bothered me more than I expected. Folks who'd known my family for years suddenly acted different because Bellcrest brought money into the county. Waitresses whispered when I walked into diners. Realtors called my farm undeveloped opportunity. One city councilman actually suggested maybe I should adapt to changing economic realities. Changing economic realities. Funny phrase for stealing from your neighbors. Meanwhile, Caleb kept showing me videos people posted online from the tournament. Grainy cell phone footage of my goats running across sand traps while golfers shouted in the background. Somebody added circus music to one clip, and it got thousands of views locally. I should have been embarrassed. Instead, I felt angry. Not because of the jokes. Because Bellcrest turned my home into a punchline while pretending they were the victims. Then came the charity tournament. God, that day still feels unreal. Bellcrest hosted this celebrity fundraiser every August. Country singers, retired athletes, local politicians, influencers pretending they liked golf. The kind of event where people wear sunglasses indoors and clap for themselves after donating money publicly. The night before the tournament, we had a nasty thunderstorm roll through Blackthorn Ridge. Wind hard enough to knock branches loose, rain pounding sideways against the barn roof. Around 2 in the morning, I walked outside with a flashlight checking the fencing because I already knew weak sections wouldn't survive weather like that. And I was right. Near the lower ridge, one entire stretch had collapsed. Not because of my goats. Because Bellcrest contractors had cut corners reinforcing it after moving everything. I spent nearly 3 hours in mud trying to patch it temporary before daylight. By sunrise, I figured it would hold long enough to move the herd farther uphill. I was wrong. Real wrong. Around 10:30, Caleb burst into the house again, looking like he'd witnessed an alien invasion. All of them, he gasped. Uncle Eli, all of them got out. I don't think I even answered him. I just grabbed my keys and drove. You ever have one of those moments where you know your life's about to divide into before and after? That drive felt like that. Because halfway down the ridge, I could already see golf carts scattered everywhere and hear distant screaming echoing up from the valley. 30 goats. My entire herd. Loose on Bellcrest National during the biggest event of their year. And they weren't just eating grass anymore. They were celebrating. One goat stood on top of a refreshment table chewing flower arrangements while 2 women in designer dresses filmed with their phones. Another somehow got inside a sand bunker and started rolling around like a dog discovering snow for the first time. 3 younger males were headbutting decorative course signs hard enough to snap wooden posts clean in half. And Lorraine, Lord help me, Lorraine was standing on the hood of a white golf cart chewing a tournament flag while a retired NFL player stared at her in complete disbelief. The entire course looked cursed. Sprinklers blasted water sideways where goats had chewed through irrigation heads. Mulch beds were shredded. Expensive imported shrubs looked like somebody attacked them with hedge clippers and rage issues. People were yelling everywhere. One event coordinator was literally crying. And right in the middle of all that chaos stood Gavin Pierce, frozen completely still, staring at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not anger anymore. Hatred. Pure hatred. You did this, he said quietly when I walked up. No, I answered, looking around at the destroyed course. You did when you stole my land. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then somewhere behind us, a goat jumped onto a catering table and shattered about $200 worth of champagne glasses. Honestly, I think that was the exact moment Gavin decided to sue me. The lawsuit showed up 3 days later in a thick envelope delivered by certified mail like I was some kind of criminal mastermind instead of a tired goat farmer with bad knees and feed bills. Bellcrest National wanted $80,000 in damages, loss of business revenue, landscaping destruction, emotional distress for club members, emotional distress from goats. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that line twice because I honestly thought maybe I misunderstood it. Caleb laughed so hard coffee came out his nose. I didn't laugh because underneath all the ridiculous legal language was something real dangerous. Bellcrest wasn't just trying to recover money. They wanted to bury me, drag things out until I couldn't afford lawyers anymore, force me to settle. Rich people know most working folks can't survive long court fights. And maybe that strategy works most of the time. But Gavin made one mistake. He underestimated how stubborn old farming families can be once they're cornered. See, my grandfather used to say land remembers who loves it. Sounds poetic until you spend your entire life bleeding onto the same dirt. Then it becomes truth. That hillside carried 4 generations of my family through droughts, layoffs, floods, and one tornado back in '98 that nearly wiped out the barn completely. We didn't quit then, and I sure as hell wasn't quitting because some country club manager wore expensive watches. So I hired a lawyer. Her name was Dana Holloway, and she looked like the kind of woman who could win arguments against gravity itself. Mid-60s, sharp eyes, silver hair pulled tight, spoke with the calm confidence of somebody who'd spent decades embarrassing arrogant men professionally. First meeting, she listened quietly while I explained everything, then finally asked, "You got documentation?" I rolled 2 filing boxes into her office. Survey maps, old photographs, property tax records, fence repair receipts dating back almost 20 years. My granddad kept everything because he trusted nobody wearing a tie. Dana flipped through the papers for maybe 10 minutes before leaning back in her chair, smiling slightly. Oh, they're screwed. That was the first good night of sleep I'd had in months. Now, meanwhile, Bellcrest launched a full public relations campaign around town acting like I unleashed wild animals intentionally. Local newspaper headlines called it the Blackthorn Golf disaster. One article described my goats as aggressive livestock. Aggressive? Those idiots were scared of leaf blowers. But then little details started leaking out. Construction workers talked. One former Bellcrest employee posted anonymously online about management ordering crews to move fence markers during expansion. Somebody else shared drone photos from before construction clearly showing the original property line. And slowly, public opinion started shifting. Not fully, but enough. Then depositions began. If you've never seen a wealthy corporate manager forced to answer questions under oath, let me tell you something. Confidence disappears fast when facts enter the room. Dana absolutely dismantled Gavin. She walked him through every permit, every construction invoice, every landscaping order placed near my boundary line. At one point, she slid an enlarged aerial photo across the table and calmly asked, "Mr. Pierce, can you explain why the original fence line visible here differs from the current one installed under your supervision?" Watching him struggle through that answer was almost spiritual. He kept using phrases like boundary optimization and landscape continuity. Dana finally interrupted him. "Sir," she said, removing her glasses slowly, "did your employees move Mr. Mercer's fence without legal authorization?" Silence. Long silence. And that silence told everybody in the room the truth. Court started in early October. Small county courtroom packed every single day. Farmers, reporters, Bellcrest members, half the town honestly. People love watching rich folks fight country people because everybody secretly picks a side whether they admit it or not. Gavin arrived every morning in tailored suits, looking exhausted. I almost felt sorry for him sometimes. Almost. Then I'd remember him standing in that office talking about progress while his workers dug into my family's land. Bellcrest lawyers tried painting me as reckless, claimed I failed to secure my animals properly, claimed I encouraged the incidents for revenge. But then Dana brought out the surveyors, and everything changed. The county survey specialist testified that Bellcrest had knowingly crossed property boundaries during expansion. Multiple contractors confirmed management instructed crews to adjust fencing positions to accommodate course redesign plans. One contractor even admitted under oath that concerns about legality were dismissed because, quote, "the farmer probably wouldn't notice." That line hit the courtroom like a grenade. I remember looking over at Gavin after that testimony. He wouldn't even meet my eyes anymore. Then came the photos. Huge printed images showing the progression over months. Original fence lines, move posts, irrigation systems extending onto my property, decorative landscaping planted directly across surveyed boundaries. The judge spent nearly 20 minutes reviewing those pictures silently. You could hear people breathing. Finally, Bellcrest's attorney made one last desperate argument claiming I still bore responsibility for controlling my livestock. And technically, maybe they thought that sounded reasonable, until Dana stood up for closing arguments. I still remember parts of what she said because the whole courtroom went dead quiet listening to her. "Your Honor," she began, "this case started because wealthy developers believed rural landowners were too unsophisticated to defend themselves. Bellcrest National intentionally seized private property, altered boundaries without authorization, then attempted to weaponize the legal system when consequences followed their negligence." Then she paused, looking directly toward Bellcrest's table. The goats entered through fencing compromised by Bellcrest construction activity on land they had no legal right to occupy. Simple, clean, devastating. The judge gave his ruling 3 days later. I won. Completely. Bellcrest was ordered to restore the original property line immediately, remove every unauthorized improvement built on my land, reimburse all legal fees, and absorb full responsibility for damages resulting from compromised fencing. The courtroom got so quiet after the ruling you could hear somebody cough near the back row. Gavin just sat there staring at the table like his soul left his body. And here's the beautiful part. Restoring that land cost Bellcrest an absolute fortune. Entire irrigation systems had to be dug up and rerouted. Decorative stonework removed. Cart paths torn apart. One section of fairway had to be completely redesigned because it crossed too far onto my property. Millions in improvements suddenly became demolition projects. Exactly like I warned him. A month later, I stood on my hillside watching construction crews move the fence back where it originally belonged. Fresh cedar posts. Proper concrete anchors. Solid work this time. Lorraine stood beside me chewing grass peacefully like none of this had anything to do with her. Funny enough, Bellcrest never fully recovered its reputation after the trial. Memberships dropped. Locals stopped treating the place like royalty. Turns out people don't love businesses that steal from neighbors then sue them for getting caught. As for me, life mostly went back to normal. The goats still roamed the ridge. Caleb still sends me goat memes at 2 in the morning. And every once in a while I'll spot golfers down in the valley looking nervously toward my fence line whenever one of the goats wanders too close. Can't really blame them. Now personally, I never wanted revenge. I just wanted my land back. But I'll admit there's something strangely satisfying about watching powerful people learn they can't buy their way through every problem they create. Still, some folks around town think I should have controlled the herd better no matter what Bellcrest did. Others think the golf course deserved every bit of chaos they got. So I'll leave that question to you. If somebody slowly stole your family's land piece by piece, what would you have done differently? And be honest. Because if you've ever owned goats, you already know fences are really just suggestions.